While on patrol with my supervisor, we received a call about a possible break-in at an old abandoned building. I had just graduated from the academy and was still in training. It was the third shift, midnight to 8 a.m., which is when the crazy stuff happens. My fellow officers out there will understand. Entering the building with our weapons drawn, I carefully followed my supervisor's lead. As we moved deeper inside, I eventually took point after clearing a room using our standard building sweep tactics. As I continued forward, I heard my supervisor making some noise behind me. When I turned around, I saw her taking out a lighter. She flipped it open and lit it. Then she brought it close to her face, placed it under her tongue, and said something. Confused, I pressed on, still filled with adrenaline at the thought of encountering someone inside. We ended up sweeping the entire building, but no one was there. We radioed it in and resumed our patrol. The night was so busy that I didn't have time to ask her about the lighter. The next night, while on patrol, we passed by the same abandoned building a few hours into our shift. I suddenly remembered the lighter thing and asked my supervisor about it. Without a word, she turned the car around and pulled into the building's parking lot. She got out, and I followed. We walked around the building and found a chained-up door with just enough space to squeeze through. She went in without hesitation, and I followed. Confused and slightly excited since I had no idea what to expect, I nervously asked if she wanted me to radio in our location. She replied, "No, just follow me." So, we proceeded into the same building we had cleared the night before. Eventually, we reached a large auditorium and sat down. She explained that she was Wiccan, which I knew almost nothing about since I was practically non-religious. She continued, telling me she had a bad feeling when we entered the building the night before. Not the kind of gut instinct cops get when something feels off, but a different kind of spiritual sense of something sinister or malevolent. She said she needed to say a quick spell or chant, I forget the exact word she used. I'm open to anyone's beliefs and never judge. In the end, I don't think anyone really knows the truth. Although I consider myself an atheist, I found it all fascinating. So, I kept asking questions, and she realized I was genuinely interested. Then she asked if I was okay with trying to communicate with them. Excited yet slightly skeptical, I told her I'd love to. She pulled out an old flashlight, one of those where you can turn it on, but then slowly unscrew the bottom cap holding the batteries. There's a point where the batteries disconnect just enough from the metal coil inside, breaking the circuit and turning off the light. Science. She explained that some spirits could generate enough energy to complete the circuit, turning the light on. She switched on the flashlight, unscrewed the cap until the light went out, and gently placed it on the table in front of us. Then, she asked if I wanted to ask them a question. Swallowing hard, I told her I was ready. At this point, I was still skeptical, but something in me was nervous and excited. My supervisor began asking a series of questions. For the first 2 minutes, there was no response. Then she asked if we could ask them their name. The light flickered on and then off again. Sitting there in the pitch dark, in an old, eerie building, way outside my comfort zone, that definitely caught me off guard. But the rational side of me started thinking about all the logical explanations for why the light might have turned on. So I stayed quiet and kept listening. She then asked if they were a boy, no response. Then, if they were a girl, still nothing. She started going through the alphabet, and when she reached the letter J, the light flickered on. She went through again. This time, O. One more time, R. At this point, I was terrified. My supervisor then asked, "Is your name Jordan?" The light turned on again, brighter than ever. At that moment, every hair on my body stood on end, and they still are as I write this. It was incredible. For the next 5-10 minutes, we continued talking with Jordan. The light responded consistently to every question. There was no way it was random, too precise, too many times, and always perfectly in sync with our specific questions. I had the same flashlight on my duty belt, so I knew it wasn't a trick, the scary part. While we were talking to Jordan, my supervisor suddenly asked if I could smell anything. I have a terrible sense of smell and told her I didn't notice anything. She said she smelled sulfur. I figured it was just the old building or maybe even me, since I was sweating a lot from what I was witnessing. Then, out of nowhere, Jordan was gone. We asked if Jordan was still there, no response. We asked if someone else was there, and the light flickered very faintly. My supervisor asked if we could talk. No response. Then she asked if they wanted us to leave. The light flashed brighter than ever. Then it flickered a few more times and went out completely. My supervisor grabbed the flashlight quickly and said we needed to leave immediately. My legs barely worked, I was frozen with fear. Eventually we made it outside and got back to the car. She pulled out her lighter and spoke another chant. She then explained that the smell of sulfur was a sign of a demonic entity or something like that. We drove in silence for a while until I finally gathered the courage to ask more questions. Then, calls started coming in, and I got distracted. While I was in training with my supervisor, we tried doing this in a few other places, but we never had the same success we did that night. Eventually, I completed my training and was on my own. 1 year later, my supervisor was struck in the head with a sledgehammer and partially lost vision in one eye. She was medically retired. Now she does modeling, ghost-related work, and who knows what else. I have no reason to make this up. I swear on my life that it's the truth. To this day, I think about it constantly. I've spent hours researching the flashlight phenomenon, the building's history, and other encounters similar to mine. Some people try to explain it away, saying the flashlight thing has to do with heat, atmospheric pressure, or whatever. But regardless, I know what I saw. There was no way it could have happened so precisely, so many times. And when that light shined brighter than ever, it defied all explanation. I had just completed my initial military training basic, AIT, a few other courses, and was sent to my first unit. My unit was at NTC for pre-deployment training, so I met up with the rear detachment. I was assigned a room and spent 3 very unsettling days and nights in the barracks with strange things happening, equipment not being where I left it, locked drawers being opened, the microwave turning on by itself. Stuff like that. My roommate, whom I had known since training, arrived on the 4th day, and I told him something like, "Keep an eye on your stuff. Someone's been messing with mine, and I don't know who." That 4th night, my roommate and I locked our room and our gear before going to sleep. We had to be up at 05:30 for PT, so we went to bed early. Everything was locked up. I woke up around 0100 because my blanket had fallen to the floor, and I was cold, which was weird because we were in the south during the summer, and it was always hot. I got up to grab my blanket and noticed that my locker was open. I unlocked it, closed it, locked it again, and went back to bed. I fell asleep easily, but woke up again around 02:30. This time, all of my stuff and my roommate's things were scattered across the room. I woke my roommate up, and he was pissed. Someone was messing with us, and we couldn't figure out who. We cleaned everything up, locked our stuff again, and went back to sleep. The 3rd time I woke up was at Oro 337, and we weren't alone. I could hear my roommate snoring, so I knew it wasn't him. I sat up and saw someone standing in the small kitchen area, looking into the open fridge. I was freezing again. I was about to say something when the soldier turned around. It took my eyes a moment to adjust to the bright fridge light, and then I started recognizing things: his L-shaped flashlight clipped to his shoulder, his Alice pack with ammo pouches and canteens, his boots, and his uniform. This guy was geared up for combat, but when my eyes reached his face, he turned slightly and I could see half of his head and helmet were missing, blown off from the looks of it. At this point, I was terrified. He closed the fridge, walked across the room, keeping his glowing green eyes locked on me, opened my front door and stepped out. As he was leaving, he turned to me and said, "Stay safe." I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I didn't wake my roommate. I just sat on my bed for about 2 hours until it was time to get ready for PT. At 06:30, everyone was outside the barracks in formation, getting ready to start PT, when the acting first sergeant looked at me and said, "Hey, not Chase. You good? You look like you've seen a ghost." I responded, "Negative, I'm good, 1SG. Ready to go." Halfway through PT, he came over and asked what was wrong because I was visibly shaken. I told him I was fine, just didn't get much sleep last night. A few other people asked if I was okay, and I just lied and said I was fine. I really wasn't, and they could see that, but they let it go. After PT, the acting 1SG pulled me aside and told me to speak freely, openly, and with complete confidentiality, off the record. What's wrong? I told him that if I told him what happened, he'd think I was crazy. He assured me it was off the record and said again, "Talk to me. You seriously look like you saw a ghost." That made me chuckle nervously, and I started telling him my story. When I got to the part about the missing half of his head, the acting 1SG lost it. "Who the hell told you to do this? This is not funny," etc. He smoked me for about 30 minutes, push-ups, mountain climbers, all that, yelling at me the whole time, calling me a piece of shit. Finally, after about half an hour, he said, "Look me in the eyes and swear on everything you love that you're not lying to me." I told him I wasn't lying. It happened. Then he told me to follow him. We went to the command office, a place I had never been, and it was obviously locked. He took me through 3 locked doors and 3 rooms I had never stepped into before. When he opened the last door, I saw it. It gave me chills. Still does. Right there in front of me was the portrait of the soldier, hanging behind the commander's desk. I froze and said, "That's him." The acting 1SG, the guy who assigned me to that room, told me who he was. He had been a corporal in the unit during its first deployment to Iraq. He died in an IED attack that took off part of his head. I was the first soldier to be assigned to that room since it had belonged to the fallen corporal. The 1SG forgave me and I forgave him. Then he told me some stories about who that guy was. Just a few months later, I deployed with that unit and spent 12 months fighting in that hellhole. I almost died more times than I can count. My vehicle was hit by IEDs and rockets. And every time I thought about that corporal, I survived things most people couldn't imagine, and I always felt like that corporal was watching over me. Not everyone in my unit was as lucky as I was. 3 guys from my company never made it home. I've been a security guard for 2 years. About 2 months into the job, I was assigned to a hotel unarmed, except for pepper spray where addicts were breaking in, trashing rooms, using drugs inside, and threatening staff and guests with knives. It was a relatively nice hotel in a pretty good area, so the situation was kind of strange. My job was to patrol the hallways, particularly the 3rd and 4th floors, where the incidents were happening. This was in 2020 at the start of COVID, so the number of guests was limited to maybe 30, and each floor had about 50 rooms. Guests only stayed on the first 2 floors. I think the most I ever saw there while working was 5. The hotel was shaped like a bird, with a straight central hallway about 50 feet long, and then 2 wings that angled back, each about half the length of a football field. These were very long hallways. It all started with a room light being on every time I arrived. There was a guy who worked the night front desk and a janitor who left around the time I arrived at 10 p.m. Each of them assured me that absolutely no one went up to the 3rd or 4th floor to clean or do anything. No guests, no staff, only the addicts. But no incidents had occurred since our company was stationed there. Around 20 rooms had been trashed, and none of them had been touched in the month I worked at that location. When I got there, it became routine to go up to room 439 in the left wing and turn off the light. Sometimes it would turn back on by itself, and I'd have to turn it off again. These were toggle switches, so they had to be flipped intentionally. It wasn't an electrical issue. For maybe 2 weeks, that was all just a weird occurrence. That hallway always gave me a bad feeling, but I couldn't understand why. And that room made my stomach turn every time I walked into it. It felt like the room from 1408, as if it was going to trap me inside if I didn't hurry. It was also the only untouched room at the end of that hallway. 6 rooms had been broken into, 2 had their doors ripped off the hinges and completely trashed. Room 439? Immaculate right in the middle of the others. Every time I checked, something was slightly out of place. A drawer would be half open, a picture frame would be crooked, a pillow would be off-center. No matter how many times I fixed things, something else would change. During my 3rd week, things got worse. I went to turn off the light as usual. Then after clearing the other floors, I started my usual outdoor patrol. On the sidewalk at the base of the building, right below where room 439 was, a rabbit jumped out of a bush directly in front of me, looked at me, looked up at 439, and then hopped away. I thought it was just a cool experience, until it started happening every time I walked around the hotel, which I did every hour. I started getting the feeling it was trying to send me some kind of message, but despite being pretty open to the supernatural, I didn't want to believe the bad vibe I was getting from 439, so I ignored it. Later that week, I was walking past room 439 when my flashlight started flickering. The closer I got to the room, the worse it got. When I unlocked the door and stepped into the threshold, the flashlight died completely, leaving me staring into total darkness in that room that made me nauseous. I shut the door and went downstairs to talk to the front desk guy. We had already discussed the weird occurrences over the past few weeks after the light problem became a regular thing, and he was determined to see it for himself. He locked the front door and followed me upstairs. The whole way there I kept thinking, great, now it's going to work fine, and I'm going to look like a paranoid lunatic. I'm not lying, just a few steps down the hallway, my flashlight started flickering again, and it got worse as we got closer. I unlocked the door, reached my hand over the threshold, and the light died instantly. He started freaking out and turned on the room light, wanting to look around. He told me he felt sick just standing inside the room, something I hadn't mentioned to him, but exactly what I felt every time I entered. He decided he wanted to get out of there as quickly as possible and said he'd see me later. The night went on, and around 4 a.m. I walked into that room for the last time and said, "Look, I'm done coming in here. I don't know what kind of evil shit is in this place, but leave me alone and go back to wherever you came from." That was a mistake. Maybe 10 feet down the hallway was the emergency stairwell, which I always used to go back to the first floor. 2 steps down the stairs, I heard the door to 439 slam open, followed by loud footsteps coming straight toward me. When I turned around, the stairwell door swung open, and 3 heavy steps thundered in my direction, then stopped. All I saw was the stairwell door slowly closing while I stumbled down the next few steps in absolute panic. I told the front desk guy what happened, and during the last week of our contract, I didn't even go near that wing of the 4th floor. Half the time, I didn't even go up there at all. I mentioned the basics of the supernatural occurrences to my patrol supervisor and several other officers, and they all told me they had felt uneasy in that room too. But apparently I was the only one who antagonized whatever was in there. Oops, I have no idea what happened, but even though I've had multiple paranormal experiences in my life, this was by far the scariest in the end. I haven't been back to that hotel since, and I'd like to keep it that way.